Joining us this evening is from New York is Dr. W.P. Singh Sidhu, professor at the Center for Global Affairs, New York University. Good evening and thank you for joining us here. Statistics, they say, without context can be misleading. What is your assessment of the situation in India, the Indian economy?
Well, I think you did an excellent summing up there of the challenges that face this particular government. Essentially, the growth numbers are down. We've known that for a while, but it's only that the government has admitted it now. So what else can the government do and needs to do now in the way going forward? I think there are 2 or 3 things that it needs to do right away. A couple of them you've already referred to. One is trade. The second is exports, which is obviously related to trade. And this is where I think sectors like defense are something that needs to be stepped up and built up in terms of exports. Look, for example, at what Brazil has been able to do with not high-tech weaponry, but really with low and even medium-tech weaponry. So that's number one. Number two, we have something like $70 billion coming in every year in terms of remittances from the diaspora, which, as you know, is the largest in the world. That is not all going in as investments. And that's another area I think that the government could try and incentivize so that, the diaspora still continues to use the remittances in many ways, but, provides investment in that sense to boost up the foreign direct investments. And third, and perhaps the most significant one, which is something which has been lying over since the last government, is land acquisition. And here, I think the role of the states is going to be very, very critical. And there we've seen that the government has already done a misstep with the education policy. So it will have to move very, very carefully and cautiously as it tries to also develop that part of the economy, which is going to be crucial.
We also have Lord Meghnad Desai with us, author and Professor Emeritus at the London School of Economics, joining us from London. Good evening, Lord Desai. Good to have you back on the show. The jobs data is something we discussed during the election. It's back in the news. At that point, the government said that those figures are wrong. Now they say the method of calculation is different, but the crisis, or if I can call it the crisis, persists. 45-year low. How can this be fixed?
I think the unemployment numbers are junk. I have said they are junk, and I'll continue to say they are junk, because if the economy has been growing more or less at 7% for the last 5 years, unemployment cannot be at 45-year high level. Because 45 years ago, Indira Gandhi was in great trouble, and there were public demonstrations, marches, railway strike, and to compare 2019 with 1974 is just bananas. I mean, nobody should seriously put those numbers forward. But that apart, I think the GDP numbers, first of all, yes, they are down. But I think the reason is very simple. Pending the election, people have been suspending spending because it raises uncertainty. The markets are very afraid of uncertainty. And now that the elections are over, there will be a rise in spending. But also, the government will be able to spend money, because the government could not spend money except in the vote on account which they had put forward last February. The budget will come very soon, and that will restore the momentum in the economy. I think India's economy is by and large pretty sound, and I think what the government has been doing, fiscal responsibility and sort of spending, I don't think one can afford a tax cut, because as it is, the government of India doesn't collect that much revenue as a proportion of GDP. And if it wants to do big spending, it will not be able to afford income tax cut unless they cut expenditure somewhere else. I was very struck by what your previous person said. I didn't get his name. But, remittances, I think, again, remittances, India has the highest number of highest in dollars of remittances coming from abroad. 80 billion came in 2018. But, ultimately, these are money people are sending back home to their families. And those families ought to be able to spend them wherever they like. Obviously, sometimes they build houses, and that is a kind of investment. But you can't actually say you have to go invest in the stock market or something like that. My view, government ought to do something, but there is no panic. There's absolutely no panic, because also its quarterly numbers will be revised. Right. These are just preliminary numbers. And, in economics, no number is accurate within plus minus 1%. So, you say 5.8, it could be 6.8, 4.8. We don't know. So I think the important thing for Nirmala Sitharaman is to keep her head, and she's a very sensible person, and I think move very cautiously. I agree with the previous speaker that the insolvency and bankruptcy code is very important. The government has to push more in it. But there was a suggestion a while ago that the Reserve Bank of India has excess reserves, and we are awaiting the report from a committee. Bimal Zalan is the chairman of the committee. If they recommend that those excess reserves can be reduced, then that money can be used to boost up the capital of the PSU banks. Right. Because I think there would be enough money there. And then I think what the government ought to do is to sell, so privatize at least part of those banks. They ought to sell that to private sector as equity and have a mixed ownership rather than this 100% public ownership. I think 50 years on from Indira Gandhi's ghastly reform of nationalizing the banks, the time has now come to unwind that mistake and slowly let the banks perform in the market, because what has happened is by being publicly owned, they've had very bad management. They have made serious mistakes in lending money to unworthy borrowers. And I think we need serious discipline. And I'm sure Nirmala Sitharaman will improve the discipline, and then the cost of credit will fall and liquidity will improve.